Well, this is starting out great. Oh my god. I would never let this go through to production. This is a mistake that I see all the time from junior applicants. I'm Max, I'm an engineering manager, and today we're roasting ChatGPT's code. At the end of this video, I'll let you know if I see this code in an application, if this would actually make it past the interview stage. I've asked ChatGPT to build a production service for me. Let's see if it's actually any good. Alright, so you can see on my prompt on the screen here, I'm just going to scroll all the way past this. Let's get directly to the code. The first thing that we see is we are importing Flask. Now, I'm just going to skip through all of this and get directly to the core question. Why would we use Flask for a production service? It's 2023, it's basically 2024. What are we doing with Flask? And ChatGPT has a very long answer for us. Main point, it seems, is that it's good for educational content. We're not trying to do anything educational right now. We're trying to build a mini production service. So let's go ahead and ask it, redo this in Fast API. And let's take a look at the code. We can look at the structure a little bit later here. Let's start off with the database that it created. Ouch. Are those hard-coded database credentials? I mean, you have your password and username directly coded in. Ooh, that's definitely not going to production. Is everything created on app startup? Where's your factory? Variables initialized on app startup, that's going to cause a bunch of problems. Really, we should be using a factory pattern here. It just gives us so much better control of the life cycle of everything. Obviously, it's going to make testing so much easier for us. Let's move on here. We've got the model definition, nothing to complain about here. Now we're going on to the schemas. I see some outdated typing hints here. Not too big of a deal, but still something I generally try to avoid. We have outdated pydantic notation here. This is no longer relevant. All right, going to our CRUD. This is 4 lines of code that have a ton of comments. First of all, why on earth are we doing relative imports? Let's always use absolute import pass here. The next thing, we've got our get monsters method here. Why are we using a synchronous method for a database query? This should obviously be asynchronous. But aside from that, we have the limit and skip defined within the method. I understand the concept here, but if we're doing a paginated endpoint, this really should be defined at the endpoint level and these parameters should be passed down. There's no reason we should be having these definitions here too, because we want this to fail if we're not passing these parameters properly down. Otherwise, the whole response is just going to be super confusing if we have default values. All of this needs to be delegated at a much higher level, and we shouldn't be using any default values here. We're not even sorting. Postgres doesn't reliably return the order of the rows. If we're not sorting here, our pagination may not be consistent. Obviously, that's something we want to avoid. So we should definitely have some sort of sorting mechanism here to make sure that our pagination is actually consistent. Let's take a look at the main method here. We've got more relative imports. We got outdated typing already. We are again creating our application just on startup. We have no factory patterns here. Let's start, I guess, at the very next line. This is a very weird way to inject your database session. It works here because the format of the actual endpoint is also completely wrong. I would never do something like this because this really isn't very good separation of concerns that we have going on here. So we're creating our session at every request. I kind of understand the idea of that we can pass this on, but really we should have no business logic in this endpoint definition here. We should just have a single call here that should delegate everything to all of the work that's actually being done to the business service classes. And that's also why factories and everything are so nice. Next thing, we are using a synchronous endpoint here. That's just bizarre. If we're using Fast API, this really should be a synchronous definition. And also we're doing database operations. Why on earth is nothing here asynchronous? Obviously that's not going to fly, but we do have the definition of the skip and the limit here, at least on the entry level. So that's great. Next, let's take a look. A requirements.txt file. Why are we not using poetry? Why are we not using pipenv? This is really a terrible way of managing your dependencies. We have no ways of locking version. And if you're unlucky, you'll deploy your service one day, you'll deploy it the next, and it's no longer going to run because one of your dependencies got updated. You don't have proper locking in place. You're just going to have a mess on your hands. And well, there we got the pip install requirements. We are starting a production application in development mode. Obviously, that's not something we want to be doing at all. Let's go ahead and go up and actually look at the suggested project structure that we have here. We've got everything as individual files. All of these, or almost most of these, except for maybe that main.py, really should be directories because we want to have this extensible. These things are going to get big over time, and there's no reason any of this should be individual files. Now, looking at the tests and reading the definition here, test cases for the API, this is a mistake that I see all the time from junior applicants, and I really hope it's not just about the API endpoints here, but you want to make sure that your test cases cover everything, not just the API entry methods, but you want to make sure you have unit tests all the way down to the lowest level. Testing, proper testing, large coverage, and making sure you are actually testing most of, not all of the methods that you have is extremely important for production code because it really helps prevent regression. We have a then folder here. I really hope this is included in the git ignore. We have a .env file. Again, I really hope this is included in the git ignore. We should not be pushing or setting any secrets within our code. All of these secrets need to be injected over configurations and environment variables, not part of the application that's built. Speaking of building, how are we going to build this? And we have no containerization at all here. How are we going to share this with a colleague who's using a different machine or has a different setup on the same style of machine? And how are we going to go about building and deploying this into a production environment? We need to have some sort of containerization form here to actually be doing this properly. So there you have it. This level of code really is something that I would maybe expect from an intern applicant. This really looks like someone who pulled up the documentation and just learned from the documentation of Flask or Fast API and just copy pasted it over. If I see this in an application, if it's anything past intern or very, very low junior, that would already be an immediate no. If it is at that very, very low entry stage, a lot of my interview questions are going to be digging into this and really understanding and trying to see that the person didn't just copy over from the documentation, but they actually understand what they're doing. And maybe we'll have a lot of discussion about some of the points I just mentioned, and I'll try to ask some probing questions if they understand why some of the things that they're doing here are bad and maybe why doing things differently may be better. If I can't see any sense of that, then yeah, that's definitely a bad sign. So you can generate workable code through ChatGPT, but this code really just kind of resembles what I would expect to see on a getting started page on the documentation of Fast API or something like that. I really would not trust this code at all. Wouldn't deploy it to production. It's not maintainable. It's not very well structured. It's not really what you want to see in your application structure, and definitely don't rely on it for interviews or something like that. If there's anything else that stood out to you that I maybe missed or didn't touch on, I would love to hear it. Go ahead and post it in the comments below and let me know your thoughts.